Welcome back into the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where an agent being a podcaster was never bound to work. I'm Brendon Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That's been Axelrod, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. It is Thursday, January 15th. Back for you a third time this week. We're live on X, where we are broadcasting this here show going forward. So follow us over here. Subscribe on YouTube. Again, here for you 3 times a week covering all things sports media. Today, ESPN's interesting embrace of college football on its daytime lineup and what the game viewership numbers tell us about how all of that is going. But first, said agent Rich Paul and his show Game Over on the Ringer with Max Kellerman is ruffling a lot of feathers. Los Angeles Lakers fans not pleased, and apparently management either, that Rich is pitching trades of the star player on the team that he does not represent, which would be Austin Reeves. And the fallout here continues to become national news, Ben. What did you think of the kind of initial, before we get to like the big picture of the show or Rich Paul as a content creator guy, or we'll get to Bill Simmons' response, but just like the first chapter of this story, just seeing Rich Paul so blatantly give a take on the team we most closely associate him with already, the Lakers, because he represents LeBron James.
The first time I took note of this was pretty early on. I think the show launched in early December, and he had a quote at the time. It might have been the first episode. I don't know. I haven't even listened to a full episode yet, but he had a quote early on where he said the Lakers aren't championship contenders. And that caught my eye, just in terms of like what Rich Paul says about the Lakers is inherently interesting, because he is LeBron James's agent. He is LeBron James's close friend. Like, LeBron can try to distance himself from these comments all he wants, but it's a pretty natural line to draw from Rich Paul to LeBron James. And so that at least caught my eye in terms of, okay, this isn't like, I wasn't sure what this podcast was going to be. I didn't know if it was Rich giving like the behind the scenes of the NBA. I didn't know, as it turns out, it's just Rich Paul and Max Kellerman giving takes, it seems like. And so it caught my eye that he's willing to say things like that. And also, just having been in the LeBron universe for as long as I have, I've always been prone to read between the lines of those type of things. Yeah. And so back when that happened in December, it definitely caught my eye. I kind of tucked it away and said, all right, this is something at least worth following. I think it got, lost in the shuffle with the holidays. I'm not very plugged in to the NBA right now, like on a day-to-day basis. And so definitely filed it away. But yeah, everything that's happened this week with the proposed Austin Reeves trade and all of that has definitely taken all of this to a different level.
Yeah, so it was like I don't even have the clip of what Paul said about this Austin Reeves proposition, because like it doesn't even clear as like fascinating content. It's just the fact that he did it, right? It was basically just him saying, hey, the Lakers need to get better. They're not a championship caliber team. The defense isn't where you need it to be. DeAndre Ayton has been a disaster over there. If you kind of see some of the clips of his lack of effort, and Lakers fans have turned him into the kind of enemy number one. Hey, Jaren Jackson Jr. in Memphis, let's go get him. If I'm the Lakers, how do you do that? Well, the NBA CBA is a nightmare now. So really the only way it would make sense, you got to trade Austin Reeves. And Rich basically said, yeah, I would do that, And so, but immediately after that, Jovan Buha, who's kind of an independent reporter over there now, used to work for The Athletic, says management very much took note of that particular clip, going around. And then that night at the game, well, I guess Tuesday night, the day after that clip came out, Dave McMenamin at ESPN reports that not anything physical, but a confrontation of sorts between Rich, who represents LeBron with Clutch, and Austin Reeves' agent at CAA, one of the couple of guys that represents him. And so it just like the domino effect was immediate and obvious. It's like this was bound to happen. And I guess, like, again, to kind of keep it in square one here, what did I think we talked about Max Kellerman coming back on maybe the three of us were on the show, or I know you and I talked about it, and you
Mhm.
were impressed with, like, Max's appearance on the Simmons show, and kind of excited for maybe Max to be back in the content game and have some of his outlandish, imaginative takes circulate the web again and get people riled up like they tend to do. But what about the Rich Paul side of it? Like, were you intrigued at the idea of listening to Rich Paul do a podcast? Like, even if it had been the version, let's say it had been the version you said you thought it was going to be, which was this sort of inside baseball thing. Would that have like made you want to check it out? What did you think of this idea that Rich Paul would be here in general? Because I do think we kind of just glossed over that up until now, where he did the thing.
Yeah. So I thought it was going to be, like I said, I thought it was going to be this inside baseball. That's even how Bill Simmons kind of pitched it, was like, Rich knows, like, this is, he'll say this about why players like going to certain cities, or he'll say this about why these road trips are the ones to really pay attention to. Like, Bill Simmons pitched it as a very inside baseball type of thing. And that's what I was expecting. And I wasn't particularly intrigued by it. I have a very, very high barrier to entry to get into my podcast feed these days. And
I think it's true for a lot of people, right?
Totally. I mean, and that's, I think a lot of people consume podcasts based on TikTok clips at this point, and consume them one question or one clip at a time. And so I think that I just thought this is going to be another sports podcast. I'm sure Max Kellerman will say some outlandish things that we'll write up. I didn't really think much of the Rich Paul angle to it. And then lo and behold, he's saying things about the Lakers. And I think the thing we should really point out about the Austin Reeves side of this is, it would have been one thing for Rich Paul to say the Lakers should trade DeAndre Ayton. It would have been one thing for Rich Paul to say the Lakers should trade Rui Hachimura. The fact that he said Austin Reeves, now I know there's the salary cap and the CBA angle to it, but the fact that he said Austin Reeves, and this is something that Jovan Bua pointed out, Austin Reeves is in direct competition with LeBron James in free agency next year when it comes to who the Lakers are going to re-sign. And so Rich Paul
it all comes off the summer last year, where LeBron and Rich were playing mind games with the Lakers in the league, trying to exert kind of influence. And I feel like realizing they didn't have it anymore. So maybe Rich was like, well, fuck it, I'll start a podcast then. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if that didn't work, if the leaks didn't work, then give me a mic,
Right. And so it comes off as Rich Paul advocating for the Lakers to trade Austin Reeves and basically make their decision for them. You're going to pay LeBron James next summer. You're not going to pay Austin Reeves. I don't even know what the viability would be for them to re-sign both of them. I'm guessing they couldn't. But yeah, I mean, that's how it comes off. And then LeBron can distance himself, and even taking LeBron at his word. Let's say this is totally independent of LeBron. There's no greater conspiracy theory here. You still can't separate Rich Paul's selfish interests from his opinion. Like, Rich Paul inherently has a selfish interest when it comes to getting Austin Reeves traded so that the Lakers are more able to re-sign LeBron James. So I think that's like the part of this. It's one thing for Rich Paul to be weighing in on the Lakers roster. It's another for him to be openly advocating for things that suit his personal interests and his clients' personal interests.
100%. And we should say, like, LeBron James is not the only player in the sport or in sports that he represents. He is Myles Garrett, Jalen Hurts, Trae Young, the list goes on, right? And so it's like impossible not to be doing that guessing game as you're listening. And to me, that it borders on being not even like content anymore. It's
well,
like
it's content.
Weird,
it's content.
Everything's content, I guess. A commercial is content, but like, just, I don't want to like overstate it, because again, nobody's forcing anybody to listen to this, but it is something that the Ringer chose to invest in. It's part of this Netflix deal, which, it's a very selective group of shows that have gotten to make that leap as Netflix does this. And It says something about the prestige or like, resources that are going to go to something to have it be put up in that way, and money that could go elsewhere. Whatever way you want to look at it, it matters that these decisions get made. And especially if you're a Lakers fan or a fan of a team that Rich is trying to exert this level of influence over, all this stuff should matter to people, even if, it just throw it in the pile of other content that you just ignore that kind of goes around in the world, right? But Bill Simmons finally weighs in on this yesterday on his show. Of course, the guy who had to give the green light to this project and who people rightly pointed out likes to troll the Lakers, right? And is a Celtics fan. So here's what Bill had to say.
As much as I despise the Lakers, I would never use a Ringer podcast to try to bring them down. That feels like bad karma. It feels like something bad would happen with the Celtics. So how dare you on that? This podcast has made a lot of news for the Lakers stuff, especially this week. And if you haven't listened to it, it's Rich and Max. They've known each other forever. It's a really good podcast. I won't call it a fear, but my one question with it was, is Rich going to be candid? He's still an agent and a power broker, all these things tied to LeBron, obviously. Is he going to be candid? Is he going to be candid about the Lakers? He's been incredibly candid. And I was walking around LA on Monday listening to it, and all of a sudden he's talking about how the Lakers need Jaren Jackson. And then it's like, well, they would have to give up something to get him. And, maybe Austin Reeves if they don't want to pay him. And it sounded like my podcast, but Rich is LeBron's agent. I love it.
All right. I'm going to cut it there because I don't want to go over a minute and get us, docked on YouTube. But I'll just say this, Ben. He's not being candid.
Right.
I have no way of knowing for a fact that Rich Paul is being candid. He's being provocative. He's being... he's going viral.
Yeah.
I mean, to the extent we know anybody's being candid ever, whatever, like we can have a deep philosophical conversation if we want, but I have absolutely no reason to believe that Rich Paul is being candid. I default, even without being a media analyst or whatever you want to call our job, I imagine anyone listening is going, well, of course an agent would say that. Or what's his angle? Why is he doing that? What's the narrative he's trying to push? Who would ever listen to that and go, wow, authenticity. Thank you, Rich Paul.
Candid would be Rich Paul saying Trae Young's really pissed that he got traded to the Wizards. Candid would be Rich Paul saying Myles Garrett really wanted to leave the Browns, but they offered him a bunch of money. There was no way to trade him, so he took the money. Candid would be Rich Paul saying LeBron James is concerned about whether the Lakers are going to pay him or Austin Reeves this summer. Candid is not like floating a trade that suits your personal interests. Like that is not candid. That is advocacy. Like it's not.
Or candid would be saying, we got to find a way to get LeBron paid and Austin's in the way of that.
Right.
I mean, that would be an absurd thing to do, but that would qualify as a listener for me as, okay, that's probably how he feels. That's the truth.
And so my question for Bill Simmons or about Bill Simmons would be, what would he think about this podcast if it was a Barstool Sports podcast? Like, what would he think about if this was the boardroom? Because I've heard Bill Simmons criticize this type of content before. Like Bill Simmons is one of the people who's been most vocal about player podcasts and players saying things going unchecked. And I know Rich Paul's not a player, but he speaks by proxy, he is their agent.
Well, that's actually the difference. That's exactly why it's worse, because later in the clip that I cut off right there, Bill went on to say a lot of these guys, he lists like Draymond, Paul George, Jalen Brunson, have turned their shows into these places where they just are, giving their opinions and takes about the sport that they play. And it's been great content and blah, blah, blah. This is different because for those guys, their job is to play basketball. And this thing is kind of an addendum to that, where maybe they're going to give you some insight into that job and the kind of broader ecosystem around it that you might not get because they're a main character in that universe and that has its own interests, right? This person's job is to negotiate, make money, and control the narrative. Mm-hmm. That is a person who talking and giving opinions is entirely an unreliable narrator to listen to in any context. If you listen to an interview with Rich Paul, you would think that. It doesn't even have to be that he's hosting this podcast, but in this case, he is. And like the other point I would make on this with regard to the Ringer specifically, and the kind of, you were saying Bill's history of being skeptical of this stuff. He went on a pretty, I wouldn't even call it a rant. He explained, he took us behind the scenes when the Belichick media tour was starting last year and said that he had met with Bill Belichick and he just didn't really buy that Belichick would go there.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what qualifies as going there is just saying stuff that goes viral. Is that what we're supposed to take? Belichick was actually just too boring, and Rich Paul it can piss people off enough and rile people up enough that it's good. It works. Like, I think the standard should be candid. I think that actually is a reasonable bar to expect people to clear if you're going to give them money and a platform. But Rich Paul, I mean, maybe he really just thinks Jaren Jackson is so much better than Austin Reeves, and from the bottom of his heart as a Lakers fan, that's what he thinks should happen. But again, we have no reason to believe that. We have every reason to believe that this is just negotiating nonsense. And I just think it's kind of disrespectful to the audience to put that in front of people and expect them to eat it up.
Yeah. And I think the other part of this is that Rich Paul has not earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to any of this. Like, this is the agent who is, I mean, one of the most powerful agents in all of sports, but he's known for these sort of public pressure negotiating tactics. Like, this is something, again, I've followed LeBron his entire career. This is something that's been a constant in his career for more than a decade now. This is something we've seen with Anthony Davis getting out of New Orleans. Like, Rich Paul, it's like if your favorite player or a guy on your team signs with Rich Paul in Clutch, like, it's like, okay, there might be some public messiness now because Clutch is willing to get messy.
Yeah.
So I don't think Rich Paul has bought the benefit of the doubt on any of this. And I think the other thing is, like, the Max Kellerman part of this is he doesn't have that person on the other side who's going to check. Like, I'd love a Rich Paul, Brian Windhorst podcast, which is never going to happen. But I'd love for somebody who's well-versed in the salary cap, well-versed in the CBA, well-versed in the NBA to be on the other side of this saying, well, how do I know you don't only want that because the Lakers are facing a decision of whether to pay LeBron or Austin Reeves, which, like, again, we are three people, me, you, and Jovan, who have drawn that. I mean, other people have too, but it's like, it's a pretty easy line to draw in all of this. And so I just think, I think for Bill, I don't know if he, just saw the idea of having a Rich Paul, Max Kellerman podcast and thought it was too good of an opportunity to pass up. But I agree. I think the idea of presenting this as candid when it really feels more like player advocacy for Rich Paul and his clients, I think that missed the mark.
Yeah, and some blame for Kellerman too. I mean, Kellerman seems to have handpicked Rich as the partner for this. He probably could have had his pick at a bunch of different people given his prominence in the industry, and he's a well-respected guy and talented dude. Like, if he wanted to do it with some other up-and-coming radio host in some city that he liked, I'm sure that he would have gotten the okay from a place like the Ringer to do that version of the show, but he picked this as well. Yeah, and to wrap this one up, I won't play the clip because it's pretty long, but the follow-up on Wednesday's episode of Game Over, which I don't even think I said was the name of the show, Kellerman pitches to trade Luka Doncic because he can't play defense. So, I mean, just full circle. Nico was right. That's where we're at here. And that show, I don't know. Maybe
do you think it's sustainable?
And I'm just
do you
being
think it's
naive.
Sustainable?
Probably is sustainable because Max Kellerman went viral regularly on First Take. And, if you add in the Rich Paul side of it LeBron's career might fade. Maybe that makes the Rich stuff a little less relevant. Some of the stories he's told, I didn't want LeBron to go to Miami, things like that will come and go, but he's still going to continue to represent a lot of the top players in the league. Right. So it'll be replaced when he represents, the Boozer kid who's coming up in the draft this year, or whoever he gets. And then there'll be stories from that, it'll kind of just go round and round. So I tend to think it will. And it found an audience pretty quickly. And it's not a bad show, I should say. Like, I have listened to episodes of it because I figured something like this would come up and I wanted to be kind of ready to talk about it. It's not terrible. It's actually decent content, but it's just kind of like why did this need to happen? And I think
Right.
I don't know. Maybe a lot of people just say whatever and move on, but I think it's worth nailing them on a little bit here. None of this
For
had
sure.
to be put together, All right. College football and ESPN. So let's start with the numbers here, Ben, because I think that's kind of the fulcrum, the focus of our conversation. So college football playoff, obviously it's been a very unique year, maybe the beginning of something new. We don't know, with all of this, buyable rosters and the kind of shifting power of the league, of the sport. Miami back for the first time in a long time, Ole Miss, new Indiana program, and then Oregon. And the numbers for the semifinals were down pretty considerably. Ole Miss Miami at the Fiesta Bowl was down 11% from the same window, which was Penn State Notre Dame last year. And then Oregon Indiana down 16% from Texas Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl in that same window last year. Now, the obvious thing we should just say right off the top is Texas Ohio State, Penn State, and Notre Dame is about as good as it could possibly get if you were to draw up who you would want to appear in those games to generate the biggest audience. But if you kind of add in that, some of the quarterfinal data or viewership numbers, especially for those TNT games, haven't really been where ESPN wants and whatever. Like, I think that there's kind of a conversation to be had at a base level of, if you're going to have these games, and especially if you're going to expand this thing even further, we're still talking about tens of millions of people, but is it crazy to say that it doesn't feel like the audience is quite there for all of this as much as maybe the powers that be who are pushing forward are kind of telling us that there is?
Yeah, and I'd even go back to last year, the national title game, which was Ohio State Notre Dame, which, like, to your point, if you held a draft of the teams you would want involved, those would be like two of the top 3 or 4 picks. It was a pretty lackluster number, if I remember. It was like 22.1 million, which, like, strong number, obviously, but not like what you would expect for the first ever college football playoff national title game in a 12-team field. I go back to the calendar. Like, I just think college football peaks around New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, and the longer they drag it out, you're going to have, I think, diminishing returns. It's like the NFL is in playoff mode. We are accustomed as sports watchers to know that college football kind of peaks around the start of January. And there's just something about this setup in this calendar that has shown, like, the further you get from New Year's Day, the more diminishing returns you get. So I know there's been a lot of talk about this calendar. I know there's been talk about trying to find a way where maybe you start a little earlier in August and then you do have the championship game at the Rose Bowl on New Year's Day, or at least a week later, like the BCS used to be. But I do think they need to figure this out in terms of the calendar, especially as it looks like we're going to expand to at least 16 teams here, because I do think we're starting to see, like, the longer this thing drags out in January, the worse off it seems to be from a viewership standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, we've heard from Dan Lanning that the Oregon coach, he wants the whole thing to be over by the new year. I think that's right on the money with what you're talking about. I mean, the national championship game used to be what, January 8th to 12th. Like, that was kind of the time frame for it, and now it's 3 weeks into the month. So some of that backs up. Like, I'm looking back. 2014 national championship was on the 12th. Ohio State, Oregon, 34.1 million. That's kind of the high watermark for the past decade. But this last year was a down year, even though all of that excitement and the teams involved, you wouldn't have predicted it. The schedule as well, like, I'm sure that there's reasons, and you might know some of them better than me, but I continue to wonder why, like, Christmas Eve is not taken advantage of. It's like a complete dead day, and no sport plays, and everybody's just sitting around at home. Unless it happens to fall on a football day on the weekend, it just doesn't have any sports to watch. And yet, the CFP is playing on December 19th and 20th. this past year because that was the weekend. But, you know, they're going to play on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. Why not play on Christmas Eve? Some of these pockets where it feels like, you know, it's like a 5:30, 4:30 Pacific time kickoff for the weekday games. It feels like there's some easy, you know, hits that you could just take here to clean this stuff up and get it to where it needs to be. But is there also, I don't know. I wonder, like, do you think the average American person who maybe didn't go to a big college football program, didn't go up somewhere that this sport matters, didn't go to a college where it matters, do you feel like that person cares more about college football now than they used to because of the growth of the money and the TV coverage and things like that in it? Like, do you think that that's a sound hypothesis that these companies should be making decisions based on right now?
I don't know if like the average fan does, but I do think you get like these activations. Like you all of a sudden, I see Indiana gear everywhere. I guess Indiana has like the largest alumni base of any college in the country. They count like all their regional campuses. I didn't know that. But like you do get these kind of activations. Miami's back in it. Ole Miss, like it's like I don't remember Ole Miss fans ever, you know, having their moment. So, and then you do like Ohio State fans, Texas fans, Penn State, like they'll always be into it. Notre Dame, like there are some fan bases that are just it's what they do. So I do think like you get these like activations, but I don't know how much that adds up in terms of like the overall popularity of the sport.
So Michael Wilbon had this take that we wrote up at the site a while back, and bear with me. I know it's Michael Wilbon, but he said he had this take on Tony Kornheiser's podcast last year that really stuck with me, which is that there's no general sports fans really left. Mm-hmm. There's no people who just say, "What's on tonight? Let me watch." And I think those would be the people that you would say are, because ESPN and the other networks have chosen to place a greater emphasis on college football, you know, more money going in, more networks getting in on it, you know, whatever it might be, ESPN putting more games on ABC, stuff like that we've kind of seen shift, that would just make them watch because it's what's big, it's the story, it's the big game of the day or the weekend. And I don't think that really tracks. I think you're probably right. Like, I don't think you can just kind of will that into existence if people don't have a relationship to it. And it's still college football where the kids move around at best every 4 years, at worst, as we're seeing, like, you know, month to month for all we know. But I would say, like, I think that it's reasonable to assume that Indiana is a great example. I think that there are more markets that are now going to be possible mega pulls for college football, right? Like, I think if it was a dozen before, maybe it's 24 now that are going to be reliably engaged and involved in watching on a year-to-year basis. Maybe you add Texas Tech and Indiana in from the past year or so. Maybe in the future, we'll see others pop that wouldn't have in the past, right? And the other ones are still going to be there, even if their teams are bad, because that's just what they live and breathe. So I like that I can kind of get behind. But I do think it's at an interesting place where there's this kind of arms race to get in on this. Like, you know, you see The Ringer launching a college football podcast. You see, we can get to now Josh Pate at ESPN, who their people are saying that they'd like to, foreground a lot more day to day on shows like Get Up and the lineup that ESPN has out there. I mean, Josh Pate's rise in and of itself being an example, Bussin' with the Boys and some of the partnerships that he has. Pat McAfee covering the sport. Obviously, he's on game day, but he's made a big effort to have that stuff be there. I do just kind of wonder, like, is the noise, is that actually going to find an audience, or is it just kind of, it feels like it's bigger because of the money and the attention, but the same people will probably still care about college football who always were going to. Like, in my life, I live in Phoenix. I feel like I'm a good example of what we're talking about. I don't notice a ton more people who just are striking up conversations with me or are in the mix of, like, who Trinidad Chambliss is or whatever, or, you know what I mean? And I don't know. I don't know if that's really changeable. It just seems like the floor might go up a little bit, but I don't know if the ceiling really is as huge as maybe we think it is.
So I think these decisions are being made not necessarily based on numbers and like that they're seeing college football is more popular. We need to dedicate more resources to college football. I think they just see a content opportunity. I think college football has become more content friendly between the transfer portal, between now you have more playoff debates because there's more teams involved. Coaches have always been leaving, but it becomes a bigger story now when it's a Lane Kiffin. And I mean, that was kind of a unicorn situation with Lane Kiffin leaving.
But I think that's a good example of something that probably did break through to the average, this kind of undefinable average sports fan we're talking about. The Kiffin story was that definitely reached those people.
100%. And that springs forward into Ole Miss becoming a story in the college football playoff. I mean, you have the whole storyline heading into next week is Mendoza going back to Miami, where he's from, Miami playing in its home stadium. Is the U back? Like, I just think college football with the player movement era, with NIL, with all that, it's become more content friendly. It's really similar to the NBA. And that's
or
for
soccer.
the NBA.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's like the NBA is not getting talked about on Get Up and First Take in mid-January, but we're talking about Rich Paul. We're talking about like all this drama that comes with the sport. And I think college football has just kind of gotten a little bit more drama filled. And so I think they see an opportunity there where they're thinking, hey, we don't have to do NFL Monday through Friday. We can mix in some college football too, even if we're not necessarily talking about the sport itself.
It's a great point. It's something Sam Newman wrote about for us last month 2 months ago when the podcast list went up, and this idea of all the game analysts for different networks, college football broadcasts, starting podcasts, college football broadcast starting they all have their little solo shows now. And it's because the sport is so subjective. The sport is about Heisman votes and the CFP committee and the BYU coach making an argument for the playoff at the press conference. It's all this kind of like argument-based results in a way. And that's unique also. So yeah, it absolutely can be fed into that kind of 24/7 scroll that we kind of need to fill these days. It's an interesting topic, I think, to me, because it feels like we're headed toward a bigger playoff. Maybe you ascribe to the idea that it's going to be the two super conferences or whatever form it takes, far more professionalized. Like as we get closer and closer to the end game of this stuff, I don't know. I don't really worry because I don't care about these people making money or like getting it right. But like, I wonder if it'll actually elevate to the level of product and audience that something like that kind of needs to hit on in order to fulfill all this money and craziness that is going around. Like, I don't know. Or are we just going to be like, yeah, the South, the Midwest, and some other random schools around the country? If you have a relationship, you care. If you don't, you don't. Like, I don't know if you can force that. I think it's just a big question that no one's really trying to answer before they just ram through with all these changes.
Yeah. It feels like that thing. And Chuck Klosterman talked about this on Bill Simmons' podcast this week about football is just getting more and more popular and going up and up and up, but there's no guarantee that this lasts forever. Like it could very well wind up being a bubble. And so, I definitely do wonder, like with college football and all of these dramatic changes, I think the idea would be like, you have diehard fan bases that are always going to be there. And maybe you're bringing in new fans too, but that's just a theory. Like that is not proven by any means.
For sure. Real quick, coming off that Klosterman conversation, they were talking about the football players that have been like the most wow off the TV, off the field, impressive in their lives that they've seen personally. Who would be on that list for you?
Like physical, like
their examples were like Randy Moss, Lawrence Taylor, just like that is the peak of what a football player is. They are dominating everyone else out there at what they do. They gave some examples. Do you have others? I mean, you get to watch Myles Garrett every day. I feel like he has to be on your list.
Yeah. I mean, Myles Garrett would be one. I mean, I think Myles Garrett is approaching I think he's the second best Cleveland Brown of all time behind Jim Brown. And that's probably only sacrilegious to put anybody ahead of Jim Brown on that list. And so, yeah, like for Myles Garrett, that's like, it's not quite like watching LeBron was, but it's like we are never going to see anything like this again in Cleveland and maybe anywhere else. Like he is in that top tier of freak athlete football player for me. So yeah, Myles Garrett is like number one for me.
I was just thinking off their conversation, like who is there for me? Cause that's a rare level. Like these guys are all freaks, but there's plenty of seasons where, I mean, Myles Garrett did his thing this year, but there's plenty of seasons where maybe no one even clears that bar. In a given year. They could be great, but they're not going to be like remembered for the rest of time for being like on another level. I felt like Adrian Peterson deserved a mention.
Yeah.
Like his MVP year, some of the stuff he did was like, how is it possible to never get tackled and be so far ahead of everybody else physically? And then Aaron Rodgers. I mean, to me, like the peak of Aaron Rodgers, he played the Cardinals. I got to go to some of those games that were like, 40 in the 40s, whatever, shootouts. Him on the run, flinging a ball 60 yards down the field, pinpoint accuracy. That's something like I don't want to be like, we'll never see it again because I have no idea, but I don't think I'll see it again. I'm not sure I'll live to see what he did again.
Yeah, I have Browns season tickets, and other than the team itself, like it was a brutal weather season. Like we just had terrible weather games, but my wife and I still went to see the Browns play the Bills because I just wanted to like say I've seen Josh Allen in person. Although I think I've covered a game before, but I just wanted to see like this version of Josh Allen as a fan. And it wasn't a particularly pretty game, if you can believe that. But that's like, just like, I like that, like the idea of like somebody's like physical dominance and physical skill set. So yeah, that's interesting.
All right. That'll wrap us up. We will be back next Monday. So subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media at Awful Announcing, and check back at awfulannouncing.com. In the meantime, for all of your sports media news, enjoy the weekend.